That will revolutionise electricity production across the world.
It's a strong claim to say it's accelerating.
That's like a new dynamic too. Just this trading of electricity across borders creates a whole new can of worms.
I would look and say that is a threat to the future of any utility business model.
We can't do that.
I know you can't. The reason I'm doing it is because it's the best car there. It's as simple as that.
Hello and welcome to The Energy Gang, a discussion show from Wood Mackenzie about the fast-changing world of energy. I'm Ed Crooks, and it is a historic moment for this show. For the first time, we're putting the show on video. The entire show is going to be available on YouTube, as well as on our usual podcast platforms. So, hello everyone, if you're joining us for the first time in Vision. As we're saying, if you don't know me, my name's Ed Crooks. I am an analyst who digs deep into the energy system at the research firm Wood Mackenzie. It's great to have you here. You can follow us on YouTube. You just search for Wood Mackenzie in the YouTube search bar, and then you can subscribe to the podcast there. We'll be releasing every other show. We're not going to put every single show on YouTube. So still, though, you will be able to find a good selection of episodes there. And every single episode, of course, will still be available on all those familiar podcast platforms, wherever you get your podcasts, as we say. Now, for this first historic video episode, it's a great pleasure to welcome our old friend Amy Myers-Jaffe. Amy is the director of the Energy, Climate Justice and Sustainability Lab at New York University. Hi, Amy. How are you?
I'm great, Ed. Great to be here.
It's also a great pleasure to welcome to the Energy Gang a new guest for the first time, Gerard Reid. Gerard, you're a seasoned energy podcaster, aren't you? He's the co-host of the Redefining Energy podcast and also co-founder and partner of the corporate finance advisory firm Alexa Capital. Hi, Gerard. Welcome to the Energy Gang.
Great to be here. And I didn't think I was going to make it because I got stuck in Brussels this morning and waiting for my plane, but here I am.
Well, fantastic. Very glad that that has worked out then, yeah. One thing we like to do every time we have new people on the show, we like to get them to talk a little bit about their careers in energy, how they got interested in the subject and how they got to the positions they now hold. What's your story? How did you get into energy and what path led you to found Alexa Capital?
Completely by accident. I was an equity analyst. Somebody asked me one day to look at a solar company, and I went out and visited the factory in Berlin. And I went back to the investor and said, this solar is a joke. I said, it's not going anywhere. I said, the factory is, tiny. It's all being done by hand. There's no way you're going to get costs down. And the guy said to me, would you do me a favor? Would you go meet the entrepreneur and the innovator behind the business? And I said, yeah, okay. So I went to him and he changed my mind. And the rest is history.
When was that?
This would have been about 2000, and this would have been about 15, 16 years ago. So right at the beginning.
Right, yeah.
So this investor of mine invested into Solon and Q-Cells. That's what he did before they listed. And and then what ended up happening was I suddenly became the one-eyed man in the land of the blind because nobody knew anything about solar, a little bit about wind, and then off it went from then, And obviously I'm becoming incredibly passionate about it. And as time has gone on, I'm more than ever convinced now that we're in an energy revolution, We can talk about that later on.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I really want to get into with you today. And then just tell us maybe a little bit about Alexa Capital. What do you do there?
Corporate finance. So what we are is a middleman between those who need money and those who have money, really. And we do M&A, all in and around the energy transition. And I've got different hats in my head as well. So I've obviously that. I'm involved in the podcast. I'm involved in various different think tanks. And I'm also really interested in scaling business. So that's where I'm putting a lot of my activity these days, because I think, again, there's a huge opportunity to, make a lot of money and have quite a big impact in the next years in this whole energy space.
So, yeah, as we've been saying, one of the reasons we're particularly keen to get you on this show was because of your thoughts on, as you call it, the energy revolution. If people want to get a good summary of your views, there's a really good TED Talk, which you can find on YouTube, where it's about 15 minutes and you kind of summarize your views on the four big drivers that are behind this energy revolution.
Great talk. Great talk.
Yeah, it is a great talk. I think I agree with a lot of it, probably 80 or 90% of it, maybe. There's certainly some points of disagreement.
What do you not agree on, Ed? That's where we
Well,
start. Well, keep on agreeing.
let's not jump ahead to that right now. Let's get to that when we get to it. But anyway, let's start with the points of agreement. Maybe go on. I mean, for people who haven't heard that talk, perhaps you could summarize it a bit and explain what your thoughts are and why you call it an energy revolution.
So, well, for me, it starts with AI, actually. I think AI is the biggest revolution in the history of mankind. And like every industrial revolution, the technology needs some form of energy, right? So the automobile, guess what? It needed oil, right? So what does AI need? It needs electricity. And and that's really, really interesting. So I've come to the point now where I sort of look and I say, well, AI needs electricity, but actually energy needs AI as well, because AI allows you really to optimize and to do things in a quicker and a better way. And when I look at the system that we have, the energy system, the electricity system, it's pretty old and archaic. And so there is a unique opportunity to upgrade the whole system to make it ready for this world of AI. But also, what by doing this, I think what you're doing is you're not just kicking off an AI revolution, but you're also allowing the electrification of everything else. And I'm also clear in my head that if you just, I mean, if we just sat here 15 years ago and we would have talked about the electrification of the automobile, I think we probably had said, yeah, it's going to be fuel cells, and then you just look at the innovation in the battery space. Just in the last 5 years, it's incredible, and it's speeding up. It's not slowing down. It's speeding up. The innovation is speeding up, and so what that means is that the innovation in the battery space speeds up. Guess what happens? More markets. So, suddenly, we're thinking, it's going to be trucks. Guess what? We might even be able to do part of aviation. We may be able to do shipping, right? It's all because the performance of the batteries is getting better and the cost of the batteries is going down. And by the way, if I look and you listen to CATL, the biggest battery manufacturer in the world, I mean, they're using AI as an integral part of the R&D program right now, right? So AI, as I said, is in the back of everything. But for me, the big thing really is that we are going to electrify everything. And if you don't electrify, I think as an economy or a society or a company, you're just going to be left behind.
With this AI trend, which is really interesting, a lot of the early lectures on AI focused on how it was going to revolutionize drug testing. You're going to be able to use the computer to look at thousands and thousands of compounds and scientific studies and then pick your best 5 or pick your best 10 and do them in the lab. I think it's the same thing for material science. People don't really understand what comes in material science. So you're going to be able to, find better battery materials or better battery material solutions, anode, cathode, core materials, and then also, extend that to everything else, whether it's PV or all the different, low carbon cement or, whatever it is. Just the revolution in material science that's coming is really underappreciated.
No, I'm totally with you, Amy. Absolutely. Yeah. And there are other core areas that we think of, because most of us think of AI today, and we just think of large language models. That's only one part of it, right? And it's going to be all encompassing in our lives in the years to come. I mean, that's the reality of it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I agree with that, and I think, as you say, what's going on at the moment in terms of developments in AI is really remarkable. I have to say that's something on which I've shifted my own personal views, perhaps in the past year or so, that having been initially skeptical.
Ed and I are always arguing about this topic, always arguing about this topic.
Indeed. I have become much more convinced, not least, I have to say, because of watching the way it's changing my own business. If you look at what's happening at Wood Mackenzie, where I work, we just had a town hall the other day where someone gave a bit of a presentation on new products and services, things that are available now and things that we're going to be able to offer in the very near future. And it really is pretty revolutionary. As I say, it's changed a lot just in terms of the past year. So I buy that. I suppose one possible point of difference is the question of perspective in terms of what that AI revolution means for the energy industry, and perspective in the sense of, I wonder if it depends on where you're located. So one of the things that clearly seems to be the case is that Europe still has much more commitment to the energy transition than we do in the United States. Amy and I both based in America, and obviously under the Trump administration, there is a very, very different view being taken on the energy transition in general. People reject the term the energy transition. There's a lot of talk now about energy evolution or energy addition, new technologies being added to the base of fossil fuels that we've got. And if you look at the kind of rhetoric coming out of the Trump administration, one of the things they're very big on is saying that they absolutely support AI. AI is a top priority for them in terms of national security as well as economic development. But they think AI needs to be served by what they would call reliable power. In other words, baseload dispatchable generation. So it could be fossil fuels, could be coal and gas, it could be nuclear, it could be some types of renewable energy. So maybe hydro, maybe geothermal, maybe some of the other new technologies that are starting to emerge, maybe involving hydrogen, maybe something with long duration storage and so on. But basically, wind and solar, they would argue, are not enough. They don't cut it in terms of really supporting the increased power supply that's going to be needed for AI. What do you think about that, Gerard? I mean, do you think there is anything to that argument? And as I say, do you think it's different because of a difference in kind of where you sit?
Before Gerard gets to that,
yeah, go on.
I just want to, because I agree with Gerard on the acceleration of the transition. I don't necessarily agree with you, Ed. So I want to just give us some statistics, though, so that Gerard can kind of address not only where it's happening and where it's not happening. So I looked up Crunchbase and PitchBook. So PitchBook says VC deal for clean energy is down in second quarter 2025, about 6%. But they are kind of like pointing out that nuclear and grid technology are receiving a lot of money. Crunchbase is much more pessimistic. They say in the first half of the year, they're seeing a drop of 50%, especially for early stage. And both sites agree that TerraPower, Pacific Fusion, Helion Energy, which is a fusion startup, a lot of these, Intersect Power, which is a clean energy co-location for data centers, like the groups that are getting the most money are either like nuclear or some kind of grid technology, or is somewhat connected to data centers, or the sort of carbon to value companies. So a CO2 free cement, or 12, which is a big carbon to value sort of materials company. So Gerard, does it matter that we're sort of pivoting to different kinds of clean tech in terms of funding, or you think we're just going to accelerate, period?
Let's start about what's going on in the market at present, right? What you've had is huge hype in this area of climate investments in the last few years, right? And that bubble has burst. That's what's happened. And I actually, as someone who works in the area, I'm actually quite happy it's burst, because there was businesses and technologies receiving venture capital money that, to be honest, shouldn't be receiving it. If I really look at it and I go, people taking crazy bets on carbon sequestration, which you sort of go, is this really going to be economic? Is this really the way to go going forward? So I think there's a clean out happening, and I think that's a good thing. There's also, though, another clean out, which is not just in the venture capital area. It's also in the whole area of renewable investments, as in investments in the infrastructure side of things, right? What you've certainly got is you've got subsidies falling away across the whole world. And so you're moving into a world where somebody who's doing a solar project or wind project, they have to really think much more about the economics of it than they did before, because you just can't get subsidies. So you take the case of offshore wind. I mean, offshore for me, in a large part of the world, is dead. And the reason it's dead is because it's too expensive. Okay, so why would I go and spend $150 a megawatt hour for electricity for something offshore in the US when I can get it in the center of the country at $50, right? It makes no sense, right? So I think there's a little bit of rationality coming into this market, and that's very, very, very needed. I think the really positive thing is Google, Microsoft, Meta, and all these companies, because they want power quickly, and they'll do whatever they can to get that power, and they'll go wherever they can to do it. And by the way, they do want to do the right thing. And what I mean by the right thing is they want to have as little a negative environmental impact as possible. All right. Now, it's obviously it's impossible to have no environmental impact, but they're doing their best. And I think, and by the way, having them as counterparties, if you're doing whatever it is, like switching back on a nuclear power station, makes perfect sense. Get Microsoft, Google as a counterparty, amazing. So I think we're going through a little bit of as I said, a hiccup, but there are also huge growth areas because I give you batteries. Whether they're behind the meter in your home or in front of the world, there are records everywhere across the world, right? Because the costs are just going down. EV sales, all at all-time highs, whether it's in the States or Europe or China. And by the way, I did mention China. I mean, what China is doing is unbelievable. And I think China is showing us the way forward. And they are electrifying their society. That's what they're doing. And they're doing it for lots and lots of reasons. But one is economics. It starts with economics, and then it's geopolitics and energy security, right? The US is, because go back to what you said about Europe, US, the US is really lucky. The US has the best resources in the world, right? You've got, more than enough oil and gas for your own needs. You've got coal. You've got the best wind in the world, the best sun in the world. You've got, huge amounts of water. You've got everything, right? Europe doesn't have any of that. So Europe has a problem. So our motivation is very different than the US. US has a choice. And Donald Trump can say, hey, listen, we're going to do gas. Why?
And China doesn't really have a choice in the same way because their oil and gas industry has really declined, and they have, they had mushrooming oil demand, which became a national security threat. And indeed, even you could say, well, they've got so much coal, but even for that, number one, they were importing some coal, but on top of that, it just was very unpopular in the sense that air pollution is such a big critical issue in China. So they really had, like you say, multiple reasons to do this, and they were at a strategic disadvantage to the United States. And the interesting thing now is, who's at a strategic disadvantage to whom at this point? Is the United States economy at risk because the Chinese are providing so many products and materials for the clean tech revolution that we've now reversed it, and it doesn't matter that the United States has its own oil and can export natural gas up the kazoo? I mean, it's really like an interesting moment in time.
No, totally with you. I'd love to hear Ed's view.
Yeah, well, no, I was about to ask you for your view, but I mean, I do think that's absolutely right. As you say, the fundamental difference with the United States is it has this incredible resource base of oil and gas, and the other incredible resource base, which is the skills and capabilities of its industry, and also its financial markets, capital markets, and banking infrastructure, everything else that supports that industry.
Let me just say something about the U.S. oil industry, which the clean tech industry made that mistake back in the 2000s. The same AI that people are using to do all these things in clean tech and in the grid can be used to do spacing for shale drilling. And people are going back to areas where they had drilled years ago and realizing they can recover much more resource. And so I think we're not at the end of that chain. I think really more to the point, I always talk to you about what I call the superior technology argument, which I know Gerard and I are aligned on that, which is that, what is actually the utility going to be? And we've talked about this on the show. If I could stick a bunch of batteries somewhere and make the grid reliable in a particular node that is having congestion at much less cost than waiting 5 years for a natural gas peaking plant, does it make sense? And if you're China, where you don't have a lot of natural gas and you're having to export it, you're China and you don't have a lot of natural gas that's domestic and you're having to import expensive LNG that's volatile pricing, maybe it just makes a lot more sense, even for India. I mean, India is actually investing in green hydrogen, which people say is crazy, but it's not when you consider that they had blackouts in 2022 because of the disruption of natural gas.
Yeah, 100%. Absolutely agree with all that. And as you say, big contrast to the US, where you have Blackstone, for example, investing $25 billion in Pennsylvania in data centers and natural gas fired power plants and the infrastructure to support those. So, I mean, going back to your point, Jared, about AI and the importance of that, actually, one of the things that AI is doing in the United States, probably more broadly in North America, is driving the growth of the fossil fuel industry. I suppose then my question about that is, what does that mean? And what does it mean in terms of seeing a divergence between, and I know you've used this terminology on your podcast, it's one that I rather like, but this idea of the petrostate versus the electrostate or electrostates, and the United States still being the world's largest petrostate, China being the great electrostate. And it feels like this divergence is going to grow, certainly for as long as the Trump administration or other Republican administrations are in office. And so you get possibly the world falling into these sort of two different spheres of influence, and one sphere based on the US and fossil fuels and reliance on imported fossil fuel energy from the United States, and the other one based around China and relying increasingly on imported Chinese solar panels, batteries, EVs, maybe Chinese technology, maybe letting Chinese companies set up and manufacture in those economies and so on. I think it's not entirely clear what that's going to mean in terms of kind of great power competition and, which vision of the future is ultimately going to be proved right.
Okay, Gerard, take it away, because deconstruct this fossil fuel future that everybody has the narrative around.
I think, again, I go back to the United States. Yes, the United States is a petrostate. That's really clear, okay? And they have the advantage of the resources. So they could also go the Trump route and then change. Because at the end of the day, don't forget, you're still electrifying. Because the reason you're using the fossil fuels is to electrify. The critique I'd have of the United States is that they're way behind when it comes to any of the technologies that are key to this electrification revolution, right? And I'm just talking basic stuff like transformers, right? Not enough transformer production in the country, right? If you just do First Solar, there's one solar manufacturer, yeah, but he's selling his solar panels at 3 times the price of the Chinese, right? So you sort of look at it, you go, I'd be concerned that the United States falls behind on the technology side. That would be my big concern, because I go back to what we said again earlier on. It is a revolution. And in a revolution, who wins the revolution? It's the low-cost producers. So it's the low-cost producers of the technologies, and it's the low-cost energy source. Let me give you the economics, right? Let's look at economics. I'm going to give the economics of solar and batteries today. So I have a solar system and a battery in my home in Germany. I have no subsidy for any of those solutions. So why do I do it? I can generate electricity at 10 cents with my solar system on the roof. I buy from the grid at 30. So I go, well, listen, let's try and optimize. There's no net metering. So guess what I do? I put a battery in. And I'm generating electricity then at 20 cents. That's what I'm doing. So still below the cost of it. Now that's 20 cents. Now that's putting it up on the roof and, getting the electrician in and this, that, and the other thing. We are moving into a world of plug and play solar. So you can buy 2 solar panels today, which have an inverter in the back of it, and you can plug them into any outdoor socket, anywhere. And you are immediately bringing in electricity. Now, just to give you an idea, I'm generating in Germany, just with that plug-in system.
A cloudy, cold place. Yeah,
at 5 cents a kilowatt hour. 5 cents. That's the wholesale power price, below the wholesale power price. Now, that will revolutionize electricity production across the world. Because let me tell you why, is because the utility cannot see what's going on. So he can turn around to you and he will say to you, I'm not allowing you to do that. He doesn't know. Because all the utility will see is that demand for electricity in a particular house is falling. And by the way, I said solar as well. The battery, you can put a battery beside it as well.
What do these plug-in panels cost? I mean, is this like a Home Depot thing where I can go out and it's
It's a Home
affordable?
Depot thing. So I pay them. I can go in and I pay two panels, €200. That's 2 kilowatts of power. So just again, it's such
It,
that means just from an installation, just forget about installation and you just put it in your back garden and you put an extension lead into it and plug it into the outdoor socket there. You're generating electricity, as I said, at a fraction of the retail price.
How do you intersect that solar into your home? There's another, like a bidirectional inverter or something like that?
Yeah, exactly. That's what you've got. But all as I said, it's all in the inverter, which is on the back of the panel, and you just plug
Okay.
it in. You don't need to do anything else. The power just goes where before you'd be drawing power for the barbecue in the back garden. You're just using it and pushing it into the system. That's all you're doing, and you will use
Okay.
it then into eternity. Now that's where we're going. It's getting that simple. So that there for me, I would look and say that is a threat to the future of any utility business model. Any utility model. Because what's going to happen is the price of batteries are going to continue going down. And the other thing that's happening is we are also seeing huge performance increases in solar panels. And the reason is because we're now moving beyond silicon. We're moving to other materials, and they have higher efficiencies, right? That means you get more out of that space panel, right? That's what you get more out of. That's where we're going, right? So again, for me, it comes back, Ed, what you said earlier on. I am really positive about the future because of the innovation taking place. And I'd be really clear, India will not follow the United States. They will follow China. And by the way, in Europe, we will too, because we have no choice. And by the way, it would be economic suicide for us not to tie ourselves to Chinese products because they're so low cost. Okay, if we go and decide we're going to do something else, then we're just going to push up the cost of us electrifying our society, and we have to electrify because of geopolitical concerns, because of energy security concerns, and because of the fact that it is an opportunity for Europe, because Europe also has some world-class companies in that whole electrification area, right? You can think of ABB, you've got Vestas, you've got Siemens, there's a whole pile of world-class companies. So it's really important for Europe to be on top of this. And by the way, Europe is probably behind on AI, so it also gives us a chance to push in that area as well, right?
I mean, what an interesting way of thinking about it, just in terms of thinking about, if I'm a developing country and my choice is to buy products or do developments with Europe and China as a team, or buy fossil fuels from the United States, I'm not sure that fossil fuels from the United States wins, Ed.
yeah, no, I agree. I totally see that point, and I do think that's a very compelling argument. I mean, it remains the case, right, that for now, Europe is actually still completely reliant on imported energy from the US, that without US LNG, Europe wouldn't be able to keep the lights on. So, we're not there yet. It is a transition. It is a process of evolution, whatever you want to call it. And actually, I think there will be continued markets for US fossil fuels in Europe for a long time to come. I mean, would you disagree with that, Jared? I mean, that seems pretty unarguable to me.
Yeah, well, look, first and foremost, and you know this, to change an energy system, it takes half a generation, right? So we're halfway through it. So we've got another 15 years. That's what I would say on this. So for that 15 years, without a doubt, we're going to be importing gas because we need it, right? There's no way around it, and we need something that fills the gaps, right? The gaps means for me is a certain, there's certain industries that need gas, number one. And number two, even for the generation of electricity, I can imagine gas fills gaps there as on a winter day where there's no wind and sun and there's not enough water up the mountains. That we definitely need this. Um, but I will make a point though that if you're talking from a geopolitical point of view, I have no doubt that I know people probably won't like what I'm just saying here. I have no doubt we'll have Russian gas back in Europe now pretty quickly. Because I don't, but we'll get an agreement. Any agreement with the Ukraine will involve us importing Russian gas again. There's no way. I cannot see an agreement unless that happens again. So and it's good for Europe to have a spread of or a range of sellers for gas, because at present you're absolutely right. We had one dependency, which was Russia, and we've just replaced it with another, which is Texas, right? So
Yeah, it's very interesting on that point about Russian gas. I've for a while been taking the opposite side of that bet and believing that whatever happened, as you say, maybe there'd be a little bit more Russian gas going into Europe, but not that much more, simply because of that point, as you say, that reliance on Russian gas that many EU countries had, Germany in particular, proved to be such a devastating vulnerability. No one ever wants to go back there again, and people learned that lesson.
Ed, let me tell you why I think you're wrong.
Yeah.
Because European heavy industry cannot survive with expensive LNG from the US. So all European industrial interests are really important. And I will put a bet on it that Nord Stream 1 and even maybe 2, these things will be back online, right? They will be repaired and back online. There'll be gas coming through that.
Ooh. Well, we need to have Gerard back after we know what happens in Alaska and see, what comes out of it.
We'll probably get it completely wrong anyway now, but at some point.
Oh, hey.
No, but that's very interesting.
It's
No,
really
that's a
an
very clear
interesting
view.
question. And the question is really, I like your sort of ideas about behind the meter, because I think we have this sort of bifurcated issue. What is big industry going to do versus what's going to happen to, the average Joe, excuse an American expression. And that could be, what's going to happen to people in sub-Saharan Africa or in India or in Vietnam and places like that, if there really is plug-in solar, versus what's going to happen with, like you say, big industry. And I think these tech hyperscalers, it's kind of interesting because they're hedging. Ed, you mentioned the Pennsylvania deal, but when I looked over all these deals for 2025 and late 2024 to try to sort of get a temperature on what's happening in clean tech, and is it really dying? Is that a true narrative? I kind of agree with Gerard. There was a giant bubble where a lot of people made and then lost money. So that's not 100% material, but the people out there, TerraPower, 650 million round. You've got Mainspring Energy, 258 million Series F, which is a linear generator. That's a data center solution, right? You've got Helion Energy, which I mentioned, which is a fusion startup, 425 million, including money from Sam Altman. Chestnut is a forestry AI solution, and that they're funded. I mean, basically their main customer is Microsoft. So, you have a lot of activity that's really focused on, are the tech companies serious about nuclear? Are they serious about fusion? Right? I mean, because that's, to me, like an interesting thing. I mean, obviously also long duration battery storage, but where they place their bets. And remember, they're everywhere. They're not just in America. They're looking at data centers in Europe, which apparently UK is a more favored spot because of the fiber optic build out. But I mean, it's everywhere. And maybe it'd be a different solution in China versus some other place.
What do you think about nuclear fusion, Gerard?
Or even nuclear power?
Well, let's talk about both. The nuclear fusion is, game changer if we get that sorted, right? So I think it's brilliant to see capital going into it, right? And they are whoever gets that, changes the world, right? So brilliant. Love it. Okay. Where I'd have a little bit of my issue is with some of the small modular reactors and the technologies there. The reason, and it's not that I'm anti-nuclear, the issue is, for me, they just take too long. So, okay, the first SMR comes online in 2029. Good luck, Google. You've lost the AI war. It's over. Chinese have won it. You have to have the power quicker than that. That's what I want to say. So nuclear doesn't help them get it quick. What does help them is to be able to persuade, a generator to put back on an old nuclear plant. That makes perfect sense. Go into Germany and do what you can to get the Germans to put back on the nuclear plants, right?
Is that a possibility? I mean, you sit in Berlin sometimes. Is that a possibility in Germany? Because that would be like an obvious solution.
Let me just say it's technically possible. It's politically impossible. That's what I would say. But it's technically possible, yeah. So listen, it would require a brave government to go and do that, and they're not brave, but you definitely could.
That's amazing. That kind of blows my mind. So, I mean, if you're thinking about starting to take Russian gas again, and that's going to happen, everyone's fine with that. But you can't switch your nuclear plants back on. That's
Correct. I mean, think about that transaction, especially when we remember it wasn't too long ago that some Russian drone flew over Chernobyl and dropped a load dangerously, right? That we're going to actually trust the gas because we're fearful of nuclear, but we wouldn't turn on our own nuclear plant that we could control and keep safe.
Yeah, it was, the German nuclear discussion is just highly emotional, and no government wants to take that on. And by the way, don't forget, in particular, like when you talked about when we had the crisis, well, the Greens were in power, so there was no way that a Greens economic minister was going to put those nuclear power plants back on, right? But certainly there was discussions, and there are people sort of saying, "Hey, they should do it." But as I said, I don't see it
You don't
happening,
see it
right?
happen
I
because
don't
it
see
did
it happening.
happen in Japan, which we all thought that would never be able to happen because of Fukushima was so devastating.
Yeah, yeah,
But they did turn back on.
yeah. No, you're absolutely right on that.
and there's no sign of the politics changing there. One of the things that I wanted to ask you about, actually, in terms of European politics, was the question of whether you'd get a sharp turn in terms of energy policy the way we've had in the US. If you look at reform in the UK, very much sort of against net zero goals, very strongly in favour of fossil fuels. Look at the AfD in Germany, apparently riding high in the polls right now. Again, similarly strongly opposed to policy measures to advance the transition. Is it possible, do you think, that we'll get in one of those countries, or even in a broader way across Europe, a kind of a real turn, the way we've had in the US, and a pivot away from the push towards low carbon technologies?
I think you already have it, Ed. And what you see is politicians don't talk about climate anymore, right? I mean, I'm just going to say, for anyone who's living in Europe, and they look at the year we've had in terms of the volatility in temperatures, rainfalls, etc., etc., everybody knows that the climate is changing, right? But we're not talking about it because it's politically, it's not the wisest thing to do. So what people are doing today is they're talking about energy security. That's what I talk about. I talk about, right, if we're going to be develop energy security, we have to electrify. There is no way. That's the only way you can. You have to be the only way you can become energy independent is to electrify, and that means, by the way, nuclear, renewables, and and as I said, filling the gaps in with fossil fuels. That's the way it is. So that I come at it with this angle. I also come at it with a second angle to that, which is, look, this is a huge opportunity for Europe because the United States is not going that route. So we have an opportunity to actually go and build great businesses because the world is going to electrify, right? That's what I would say. And the other thing is, again, let's talk about the automobile industry. The automobile industry is going through the biggest change it's probably ever had because the reality is the electric cars are getting so good and the costs are coming down, etc., etc. And the European industry is under threat from the Chinese. And let's be really clear. My next car is a BYD. It's Chinese. The reason,
We can't do that.
I know you can't, the reason I'm doing it is because it's the best car there. It's as simple as that. It's better than anything BMW produces, right? So why would I buy the BMW, right? So this is where I'm coming from. So we've got a lot of threats and opportunities in Europe that put us in a situation where we have to do something. And that's really what's going on. It's industrial policy, it's geopolitics. And by the way, there's definitely a need in Europe to lower energy costs. So we really have to rethink how the energy system works and the incentives that are in place and stuff like that. Now that'll take a while, But this is also really, really important because, you know, if I again go back to Germany, 30 euro cents per kilowatt hour for electricity, and then you go up to the Nordics and you're at 9 cents, right? Um, yeah, it's easy for them to electrify everything because electricity is cheap. Not doesn't make so much economic sense in Germany to go and move from gas to electricity when you've got gas much cheaper than electricity, right? So there's things that need to be changed to push this, I think, and I think that's the challenge, and that's really what the European Union needs to focus on: is how do you open up electrification in Europe, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the reason electricity is cheap in the Nordics is not because they have lots of wind and solar, though, right? I mean, that's
Wasn't it hydro? They have hydro.
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
But it is also a question of charges that are on electricity bills, right? I mean, you know, you've got so many taxes on electricity bills. You got special charges here, special charges there, and each country is very, very different, and each country can do what they want, right? I mean, the reality is, you know, wholesale power markets are all connected across Europe. So the Norwegian power price is basically the same as the German one, and so on. So it's non-electricity costs.
There's a whole debate now at the political level within the EU about free riding because everybody trades electricity with everybody else. Someone cannot put in new generation and then just skim off of the generation in another country. So this question of who's spending the money to build new generation capacity is a fight between Germany and Norway and others, right?
That
Because
that's true.
that's like a new dynamic too. Just this trading of electricity across borders creates a whole new can of worms. And
It
even
does.
in the United States, I was, working on that subject, the geopolitics of electricity trade, and I thought I was going to use the US and Canada as a model for like best governance, right? Because we never have a conflict. But of course, now we have a
I
conflict
know.
with the
Yeah,
Canadians about electricity trade and electricity access. And you've got the new, leaders in Canada talking about keeping all their electricity and moving it west to develop their own economy, right? And what are we going to use Canadian hydro for in the east? Is that going to come down to New York City, or are we going to use it to put data centers in Quebec, or are we going to use it to build a cable from Quebec to Europe or Europe to Quebec? I mean, it's like a whole new world.
It sure is.
The one more point on the EV thing, though, Ed,
yeah,
because Gerard's making this point that you're getting these very cost-effective EVs coming into the market, and who cares whether they're coming to the United States? The U.S. new car market's actually pretty small compared to the global market, and compared to places that might go EV like China and even India, right? So the real question is, what's the outlook? Like if I were Saudi Arabia sitting around today, I'd be thinking about lowering the oil price because the numbers at which Gerard's talking about for these technologies are unbelievably low. And
But
economics is going to matter.
but Amy, they are doing that. They are doing that. I mean, listen, that's what OPEC is doing. They're increasing production because they know, right? And actually, what Saudi Arabia doesn't want is they don't want companies to go and use AI technologies to open old wells and do new, do new exploration. They don't want that because they know that demand for oil is peaking, right? Forget about it now. It's peaking. So at that point in time, ooh, and so they're going to try and drive out the marginal producers in the next few years. It makes perfect sense for them. And then they're going to be the last man. Don't get me wrong. They can supply oil then to the world for the next 25 years,
I mean, I think the interesting question, because of course there's this new narrative in the United States that people like me and to some extent Ed's been on my page that, there's a trend line here for oil demand and it's not up. That narrative is so discounted in the United States. I mean, I was at a big conference and I like got a hush in the crowd because I mentioned the fact that if we really actually went to 4-degree warming, we know that it would affect economic growth. And so therefore oil demand would go down for that reason, even if it doesn't go down because we are below 2 degrees in our energy transition, right? So either way, if they think it through logically, oil demand's going down one way or the other, either because the economies are disrupted by weather events or because we're going to have an energy transition that speeds up through AI.
yeah. No, it's a great point. Again, going back to that point about differences between the kind of the climate of opinion in the United States compared to how it is in Europe.
What do you hear when because you have an international following? I mean, do people push back on you if you say that oil's like not going to keep going up?
Well, I don't get pushback on it, actually, to be honest. But maybe, my audience is not really. Maybe I'm not speaking to the, let's say, the fossil fuel industry. I'm speaking to the finance industry. I'm speaking to the electrical industry, and they all will go along with my view, which is, look, it's peaking, and they just look at China. You can see China carbon emissions plateauing and oil demand plateauing. That's the reality of it. Solar is such a cheap technology. It can be installed anywhere. Put a battery beside it. But it's like all you have to do is even just look at modern warfare, right? If you look what's going on in the Ukraine, how are they charging their drones, right? Most of those drones are battery powered first and foremost. So when people say, "Oh, we're not going to go and fly," we're never going to electrify planes, I go, "Well, go and look at the Ukrainian war."
Well, and when people say that oil and gas is needed for national security, which at this point it still is, and for some areas, but going forward, AI and delivery in national security is 100% electrified. I mean, we're talking about batteries, like you're saying, or hydrogen. We're not really talking about some fossil fuel drone, and AVs are going to be electric. Same thing.
I want to. You mentioned earlier the Iberia blackout, and what I just want to say is, if New York has no electricity for 3 days, there's civil war. That's what there is, right? Because the society can't function without electricity. That society can function without oil. If there's no oil in New York for 3 days, it's unpleasant, but you'll be able to manage. You can't manage without electricity. Now, I want to make that point because it's very important, because
That's a good point. I like
we don't we don't realize the geopolitical importance of this, because what this means is we have to realize that the infrastructure we built for electricity was built basically after the Second World War. And we've maintained it and upgraded it a tiny bit, but we've really done much not with it. And it is not fit for the 21st century. So if I look at the US from outside, I would say biggest problem the United States is going to have is it has to upgrade all of its transmission lines and its distribution grids. And the reason it does that is because it has to, if it's going to stay competitive, allow its society to electrify. Okay? China's doing this already. And Europe has done a very good job already of, and that's part of the reason why our electricity system is expensive, because we've invested heavily into wires, right? And I just think this is really, and again, in a national security point of view, you have to look at electrical infrastructure. It's much more important than fossil fuel infrastructure.
Well, and the Russians, in a way, did Germany a favor in this regard. So many batteries were put in, both residential and et cetera, after the 2022 crisis. And so it did accelerate things.
Yeah. And by the way, it's going to accelerate even more, because what's going to happen is every single car battery going forward is going to be connected and should be used intelligently within the power system. If it's not, again, it's just a waste for the society, right? I really get excited by these vehicle to grid technologies, vehicle to home. We've got one of the UK utilities, Octopus, with BYD. Chinese guys have now, they have now got a launch now of a new product offering in and around EV charging, where you're using vehicle to grid, and it's economics again, right? You can make money from the battery in your car. Just think of this, right? That's crazy.
Just going back to your point about surviving without oil, I mean, you're probably right that New York City could survive without oil for 3 days. New York City, of course, is not America. I feel like there's large parts of this country that if you made it impossible for people to drive or to fly anywhere for 3 days, actually they would collapse. That this is an economy. This is a genuinely oil-dependent economy.
Let me play on that, Ed. You will not be able, if you're in the center of the US and there's electricity outage, you will not be able to get diesel or gasoline, because the pumps work on electricity.
100%.
I just want to go back. I think we're running a little bit out of time, so we should wrap up fairly soon. But I did just want to go back to something that we were talking about earlier in terms of industrial policy, because I wanted to pick up, Gerard, on something you've been saying, which again I think I very strongly do agree with, which is the question about Chinese technology and how the United States and Europe should respond to it. I mean, you said something about it's a concern for the US if it falls behind in technology. It absolutely is the case. I would suggest the US has fallen behind in certain critical technologies, in batteries, definitely. If you think about what CATL is capable of, you think about LFP technology in particular, which is apparently, I hadn't realized, actually developed first in the United States, but obviously China is so far ahead of that now. As you say, the fantastic quality of the BYD cars and many other Chinese EV manufacturers, very, very high quality cars that are being produced there. And I heard you saying somewhere, Gerard, that you thought the answer must be for essentially Europe to do what China did to the US and to Europe, which is to allow transplants, to allow foreign companies to invest and to develop and basically kind of absorb the technology and the know-how and the capabilities from those inward investments, and then be able to develop the industries on their own. I think also an analogy with what the UK did back in the 1980s in encouraging Japanese car companies to invest, and that basically completely revived the UK car industry, which was absolutely moribund and dying at that point. And so I think there's clearly sort of a psychological barrier for people to get past, which is the understanding that actually this Chinese technology is superior nowadays, and it is Europe and the US that need to learn from that. But as I say, I've heard you say this, and I strongly agree with it, that is a barrier people need to get past, and Europe should be encouraging Chinese inward investment. So my question is, do you think that's going to happen? Are we going to see politicians really kind of appreciate that fully and actually being encouraged? I know there are a few Chinese investments starting to come into the EU, but are we going to see a lot more of that, do you think, in future?
Well, sorry, without a doubt, absolutely. And okay, so starting at the EU level, the EU want this already, right? There is, and in particular, the automobile industry realizes it as well. And they're sort of saying, guys, the only way we're going to compete is if we cooperate with the Chinese. And by the way, they've done it before. Don't forget, the Germans have all gone in. Volkswagen and BMW, they're all in there already. So, for joint ventures to be done in Europe, they have all the relationships, all that type of stuff. So that's it's gonna happen, and it's happening already. CATL is building a factory over here, and all the others are looking to do stuff and whatever. So no doubt, yeah, that and it's the only way, because the reality is we tried with Northvolt, and we failed miserably. Okay, so that tells you we don't have the know-how in Europe to be able to do it. So that means you have to team up with someone. So you can either team up with the South Koreans and the Japanese, or you team up with the Chinese. That's it. No way around it.
Yeah. I do think it's harder in the United States. We've actually had a lot of pushback to companies trying to set up joint ventures with Chinese companies and the Chinese companies investing over here. I think there are still some psychological barriers. There are national security concerns, which may or may not be valid, but it feels like Europe is clearly ahead of the United States in that, in terms of, let's say, being welcoming of Chinese investment and being prepared to try and learn from Chinese technology.
Yeah. And listen, we're heavily integrated into China. I mean, that's the reality of it, right? So, and listen, I understand the geopolitical situation is difficult, right? But Europe has to try and play this balancing act in between the US and China, right? That's what they have to do.
I think that if the war in Europe gets resolved, then the issue about China becomes a little bit more economic and a little less geopolitical, in the sense that from the US end, if you're a conservative, the risk that China would get in behind Russia and supply weapons in a more, demonstrative way, or provide or actually join a war, was a really huge risk. If we're moving away from that risk, then I think it changes the picture a lot.
I think there's another thing on the geopolitical side, which is never forget geography. And there's a big problem with the geography of Russia. and it's called all their south borders. It's not their east borders, it's their south borders, right? Their issue is China, okay? And I think deep down they know that. And they've got a declining population. You can see, and if you see what's happened, if you actually see already the I call it the infiltration of China into Russia is happening already. People are just moving there, right? You go up to Siberia, it's full of Chinese, right? So you can see this, and they'll take over that country. So, that's where they're bored. That's geopolitically their issue. So, that's why they will have to, long term, move west. They have no choice. They have to move west. They have to come friends with us. There's no way around it, right?
Back in the day when I used to go back and forth to both China and Russia very frequently, I had times when the Russians would not give visas to Chinese academics to come to a conference because they wanted to say, Gerard, what you just said. They wanted to be in front of an American and European academic group and say that China was a threat to them because of population movements.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting, to think about, we always think that the current geopolitics is a permanent geopolitics, but it's really interesting to think about the long term. And I'm really interested in your, electrostate, petrostate thinking, and whether the United States, the United States has this thing, which I've written about, which is we have the capacity to be both a petrostate and electrostate. It doesn't have to be political. It doesn't have to be personal. We could just have a dual strategy where we have the advantage of both resources and we push ourselves to a future economy that is an electrostate economy, because, of course, that is, in my opinion, where we're going.
So Amy, that's why United States has options. What's needed is a strategy, right? Not this blah,
Right.
blah, blah stuff that we're saying. It's a strategy. It needs to be, what are we going to do the next years? And that strategy has to be based around the needs of AI. And it's, by the way, we did talk about big AI. I just want to make another point as well. What's not clear is where all that electricity is going to be. And let me just provoke you a little bit in this. The lower the cost of AI, the more applications you're going to get. So what are the two big applications you're going to get? One is autonomous cars, and the second one is humanoid robotics.
Oh, yeah,
These
100%.
are both decentralized. That means, guess what? You're going to need more power for the electric car.
Right.
And guess what? That humanoid robot is going to have to be powered as well, right? So, that's very interesting.
It's going to be in my
It's going to be
house.
hospitals,
It's
and you
going to be
need more
doing my
power in the
gardening.
buildings suddenly,
Right. Right.
right? That's also quite an interesting dynamic that we're not really 100% sure where it goes, right? And I also want to go I think it's also very important from a geopolitical point of view to make sure that your data centers are not just stuck in Virginia, right? Sorry, move them. They need to be other place. You need to spread them around, right?
Nothing wrong with Virginia. It's a very fine state. But yeah, I understand the point you're making. So look, we should just about wrap it up there. I just wanted to end the one final thought then, just going back to a point that, Gerard, you started with, which is this question of the energy transition accelerating. And I think just to end, well, go on. Okay, I'll tell you what, why don't I give you my view, which is it's not accelerating. If anything, it is slowing. And the particular reason it's slowing is just because of the US basically opting out, and the US, because of the policy changes we've seen this year, definitely will be developing low carbon energy at a slower pace. And the US is still the world's largest economy, second largest emitter, and so on. That is going to be significant. And I think also, as you say, different technologies are proceeding at different paces. There's been this bit of a shakeout. There's been a correction. I think some of the hopes that people had for various types of more ambitious technology, perhaps hydrogen, green hydrogen specifically being one of them, we've had a real reality check there. And so I'm not saying I think that the transition is stopping. And I think in particular, because of a lot of the arguments you've been making about China, it very much is still continuing. but I do think that it's a strong claim to say it's accelerating. So,
Well, I like facts, right? Global installations of solar, wind, record levels this year. Okay, record levels.
yeah.
Might be record in the US. Record levels, EVs across the world as well, right? I can go onto all electricity technologies, record right this year. Batteries, exact same thing, record levels. So they speak for itself for me, right? Is just that what we're seeing is all of these technologies record levels, right? And the reason it's going to accelerate is because the cost of those technologies is going down, right? Now, what's very interesting for me is, and I'm all about technology. For me, a technology is something that gets cheaper the more you scale it, right? If I take a gas turbine today and you decide to put one in place, a CCGT, the capex costs of that are 2.5 times what they were pre-COVID, right? I mean, it makes no economic sense to be building these things.
True.
These are going to be white elephants. 2030, you put them online, they're white elephants because they're too expensive to run and they're not fit for a world where you've got low cost renewables in it. And the United States might decide not to go that way, but rational countries across the world will not. And by the way, they will follow the Chinese example. And the Chinese example are also showing how to do it, how to make sure you can keep the grid up, how you can integrate these technologies properly, etc. They have all the experience and the know-how. So the world is going to follow China.
And they're willing to export that experience through the Belt and Road. But Ed, I would make the following point. I hope, again, that there's someone from the Trump administration listening, because before I said tax credit, batteries, 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 and they stuck with that. So this is what I would say. There was ample debate in Texas to ban wind, to ban solar, to do this, do that, and say it had to be natural gas. But in the end, that's not what the state did. People said that, blah, blah, blah. But in the end, it's been batteries, batteries, batteries. And renewables are still taking off in Texas, right? So, I think that, and actually, the only thing they did do that was extreme is they passed a law that if they have to, they can turn off a data center if it's going to mean that there's a blackout that's going to harm regular people. Okay? So I think that, it seems like the country's going with what Texas is saying, but actually, Texas is not doing what Texas is saying. And if anything, the energy transition is gaining pace in Texas.
Amy, I say great example, because if you ask me if I look at the most innovative market out there for energy, it is Texas, without a doubt. Next, it's continental Europe. There's something they all share. It's called liberalized power markets. It's a liberalized market. It's easy to go in, enter the market, and you've access. You don't have a monopoly situation in that state. And they do things quickly. So the data centers go there. Why? Because they're quick, right? Why don't they go to California? Because California is slow, right? So this is a very good example of how to do it. And by the way, that economy is the fastest growing economy in the US. That's the reason, right? Because they are electrifying, right? That's what they're doing. And they're doing it quicker than anyone else.
Yeah, that is a fantastic point. And actually, that's a really interesting issue, that whole question of regulated versus competitive markets, which we should definitely address in another show. Unfortunately, though, we do have to end it now. It's been really fantastic talking to you. Thanks very much for joining us, Gerard. Been great having you on the show.
Oh, my pleasure. Very enjoyable.
Many thanks, Amy.
Thank you, Ed. And Gerard. Nice. Really a pleasure.
Yeah, it's been fantastic talking to you.
Likewise.
Yeah, many thanks
a lot
for joining us, Gerard. If you've enjoyed listening to Gerard here, you can find him on the Redefining Energy podcast, so you can check that out after you've listened to The Energy Gang, of course. Many thanks to our producer, Toby Biggins-Gilchrist. And above all, many thanks to all of you for listening or watching if you've been following us on YouTube. We do really value your feedback, so please keep that coming. Leave us a review, or you can comment on the video when it's there, and let us know what you think, ideas for future shows, commentary on ones we've put out in the past. Always interested to hear your ideas. And we'll be back in 2 weeks with all the latest news and views on the energy transition. Until then, goodbye.